Blog Talk Radio.
Well, here we go, ladies and gentlemen, across the board. It's Tuesday, and it's usually, I call it the Rust Belt Report. This is the Cleveland, Ohio show, the American Sports History Podcast, hosted by my good friend, mentor, and brother, Peter Ray. Yours truly, Mark Mancini, producing it. 347-205-9631. Goes by quick. Catch the archive on blogtalkradio.com/Mancini Sports. Podcast platforms are you subscribe to, powered by Mancini Media. Right after this is that 412 All Access Pittsburgh podcast. David Finoli and Chris Fletcher run that, and boy, I'll tell you, just a long list of great shows in this media, and it just keeps getting better with the big man driving the bus up above. So let's more of them. First of all, as I lay the red carpet down, put the podium in its place, and hand off the mic. Peter, how are you today? Second of all, how can people get a hold of you? Third of all, you got another great legend coming through your nice podcast that you come out with each and every Tuesday.
Hi, Mark. I'm doing well. I'm on Facebook, Peter Ray, R-E-A. I have a YouTube channel. I make history videos, Peter J. Ray, R-E-A. And you're absolutely right about tonight's guest. Our guest tonight is a San Francisco Bay Area sports enthusiast going back to the late 1960s. And he's getting involved in the amazing and wonderful world of Mark Mancini Sports Podcast Network. And he has a bright future in that network. Welcome to the show, Mr. Not related to the Chicago Cubs former shortstop, Don Kessinger. Welcome, Mr. Bruce Kessinger.
Why, thank you for the mass praise. I didn't think I deserved it. Anyway, good to be aboard, and I'm having fun doing this with various shows. And sports history is not new to me because, of course, history is never new. But talking about it with you is, and I'm looking forward to a nice show, and we'll see what we can come up with here.
So, Bruce, first of all, can you give us an overview of your connection with the world of sports?
Well, as started off with baseball. You're talking about mid-'60s, prior to the A's moving to the East Bay, because I am from the East Bay. Mom was a massive Willie Mccovey fan for the great, how should we say, most intimidating hitter of all time for the San Francisco Giants, first baseman. She turned me on. She was very much into him, more so than Willie Mays, because Mccovey had more to do with the Bay Area. Mays was a New York Giant prior, of course, and I followed them for a while. And then when getting into other sports was in the late 60s when we started going, when Berkeley started integrating the schools, and a lot of my black friends turned me on to basketball and football. And I've now, I have to say, because football only happens once a week, I'm more of an enthusiastic now supporter of football. Plus, I have to confess, it's my lone gambling weakness. And basketball, same thing. You know, it's a sport that I actually was best at playing. So I've been following sports since about the I'll go to the latter half of the 60s. My first ball game was at Candlestick Park, 1967. Of course, listening on the transistor radio, 1966. And like you mentioned about Don Kessinger, I did lie to my elementary school classmates who said, "Are you related to him?" And I said, "Of course I am." So that's basically my background. I've been following it religiously since then.
Now, I'm a pretty traditional person, and so that means baseball is number one in my heart. And now you go back to the late 60s, but I'm sure you've got connected to the history of the San Francisco Giants. I just looked up here on the Internet the famous Peanuts cartoon strip, I think from 1962. Charlie Brown and Linus are sitting there,
Yep.
and then not talk. And then finally Charlie says, "Oh, or why couldn't Mccovey have hit the ball even 2 feet higher?" And so, you know, that's one of the great, you know, baseball is full of wonderful history. And, of course, Game 7 of the 62 World Series, a one-run game, 2 outs, bottom of the ninth, Candlestick Park, second and third, Mccovey, and hits a scorcher, I believe at Bobby Richardson.
That is correct.
So that, I mean, do you want to talk about that? about that as a San Francisco Giants fan about that memory and that?
Well, it would be very. I would be hard pressed to come up with my own personal memory, but there's certain things that I've caught up on about that series since then. And one was that everybody talks about Maris's 61 home runs. What they forget is the man had a great arm, because Mays doubled and there was a fast runner on ahead of him, that being Matty Alou. And Maris got that ball back into the infield rather quickly so that Alou could not score. So that set the stage for the line out to Bobby Richardson. What Ralph Houck was thinking in not intentionally walking on McCovey, I don't understand. But that's how it happened. I was a gutsy thing, and certainly you couldn't call it a cheap out.
Yeah, that has to be one of the great moments in baseball, most dramatic, because he hits this, kills the ball, and that's the end. That's how it ends. And if he'd hit it, the Giants would have won the World Series if he'd hit the ball a little, as Charlie Brown indicates there. So peanuts is the end all. So that's something that sticks in my mind. With the Giants, you got all these. Would you like to talk about your experience again? We got the wonders of computers here. Now I really am nostalgic for the 70s, late 60s, 70s. But you got here the Giants. They make their breakthrough, and then they win 3 World Series in 5 years. 2010, 12, and 14. You had Dwayne Kuiper as your longtime announcer, who broke in with Cleveland. So
right.
Would you like? Do you want to talk about your experiences over the years as a Giants fan in the 70s and up until these recent 3 titles in 5 years?
Yeah. Well, you have to do that to me, huh? The 70s. I'll tell you. Kuiper's interesting. He was actually a very competent second baseman, because everybody jokes about his 1 home run. Well, at least when he was here, and he played for Frank Robinson twice. He played for Frank Robinson in Cleveland, and he played for him in San Francisco. And obviously Robinson wanted him here, or he wouldn't have gotten him over here. Very competent second baseman as far as fielding. Usually hitting the 280s, at least with San Francisco. So Kuiper was a decent player. The thing about the Giants in the 70s was they get some good young players, and then Candlestick was such how should we say, nobody wanted to play there, and they went to AstroTurf for a while, which is always a bad idea. It was a very cold park, and you had many a good outfielder come through there, like Bonds, Bobby, and Gary Maddox, Gary Matthews, and they all went on to other teams, and Maddox did, I believe, get a ring with the Philadelphia Phillies. I'm not sure if Matthews did with the Phillies or not. He was there at one point. They'd always that always happened with the Giants in the 70s and through a lot of the 80s. They had maybe about 2 or 3 good teams in the 80s, including the one that went to the World Series and lost in the Earthquake Series. And you even had the 90s with Barry Bonds, where you had they won 103 games and finished second in the division to the Atlanta Braves before the wild card was there, and they didn't make the playoffs that year. So it's been long. I'm not going to go agonizing. Yes, agonizing. We had our shot in against the Angels, and much as I love Dusty Baker, great manager, sometimes managers go, well, now that you can't do that because the the pitchers have to pitch to 3 batters minimum, but where they start tinkering because the guy gives up 1 hit and everybody panics and then goes to another who gives up another hit, who gives up another hit, et cetera, et cetera. I thought Bochy did that against the Cubs when we lost. I think it was 3 or 4 years ago when Chapman was there briefly, and I think that Baker made that same mistake in the World Series. The 70s, it's just like Candlestick was just a nightmare, and they almost moved to Toronto in 1976, and then Bob Lurie bought the team and kept them here for a while. But the issue of Candlestick was always there, and finally, you had somebody privately financed Oracle, what is now Oracle Park, and the rest is history. Really, that's where you started to get winning teams. players who actually wanted to play here instead of go elsewhere. And I think the Giants are in great shape now. I see a great farm system, and they'll be competing with the Dodgers for quite some time.
Yeah, that was a tough series, 2002. I think the Giants were up 3-2, and I believe in Game 6 they had a lead. We had, I hope I'm right about this, we had a guy named Mike Gallo on this. Was it Mike Gallo? No, another guy. There's a guy, an Angels player hit a big home run in Game 6. And I think
Scott Spezio, I think.
Scott. Anyway, so that was tough losing that. That was a tough series, 2002 for the Giants.
Oh, yeah, and I think Dusty Baker, he yanked Russ Ortiz with a 5-1 lead. The guy was pitching maybe a two-hitter, and there were 2 runners on base and 1 out. I say at least let Russ give up 1 or 2 more runs because Russ was a horse. He pitched a lot of innings that year. He was our ace. I didn't like that move in yanking him, and then that's the whole bullpen collapsed. Well, it's all documented painfully.
What are your thoughts on Barry Bonds? Do you think he should be in the Hall of Fame?
Oh, boy. You know, here's my thing on this, and it's great. If he hadn't, and let's face it, I think he did do steroids. His trainer just decided to not say anything about it and do a year in jail. But Bonds didn't need to do steroids. I think if he had not, you would have seen somebody who probably hit 450 home runs, but he was such a good batsman, he would have finished with an average at least in the high 290s or in the over 300. And as well as he hit, he would have made the Hall of Fame without them. And he still might deserve the Hall of Fame. Don't get me wrong. But I didn't like the roids. To follow that route that McGuire and Canseco paved, so to speak, and I personally think Bud Selig allowed to happen because he bungled the 94 season so badly, and you had a strike when you had a year where all sorts of things were going on, like Tony Gwynn threatening 400. Matt Williams was on pace to beat Maris's record at that point. You had the Montreal Expos with the best record in baseball. That was a good season. Everybody was enjoying it, and Selig blew it, and then the attendance went down, and then you had the steroid era. And unfortunately, I think Bonds got caught up in that. As a batsman, it's kind of like Pete Rose, too. It's like as hitting for average and all that, my problem with Pete Rose was he let the fans down as a gambling manager. I think he should get in, but I don't know whether he should get in while he's around to see it. And I don't need to hear his speech because I think he's acted like a donkey since he was tossed out. He's not remorseful about it, and he bellows all the same things. He's signing cards.
Hello.
Bonds is sort of faded out picture. I'm back and forth with Barry because he was that good a batsman. But, to get caught up in that, in the roids thing, I just think I don't like it. He didn't need to do it.
Yeah, that's one of the ironies of baseball. You got a guy, Pete Rose, 4,000 hits, which is, the most ever, and Barry Bonds, the single season and all-time home run king, and they're both personas non grata in baseball. Very strange situation. And, but that's how it is. Now, moving on to football, I really feel for I think I try to be a caring person, and Cleveland's teams. Cleveland has had a tough history in sports, and the Oakland Raiders. I'm not an Oakland Raider fan, but if you just have any sense of humanity and you look what happened to that team, and I love the '70s Raiders and just that whole experience. I mean, I really feel for Raiders fans losing the team once, now losing them again. It's like, oh, this is really bad. This is really terrible. But John Madden, Kenny Stabler. You want to talk about your experience as an Oakland Raiders fan?
I'll tell you my experience. It was a lot of fun. First off, I went to Berkeley High School. I grew up next to Oakland in Berkeley, and in the hallways in high school, it's like a lot of the conversation had to do with nothing to like homework or something like that. It was what was going to happen with the Raider game next week, and everybody just loved it. The whole the imagery, and let's face it, the fans. If you want to, at Oakland at the time certainly was a very working class town. I would compare them to Cleveland fans, Steeler fans, Buffalo Bills, all these old school AFL teams who didn't have the big market teams to start off in a lot of the time. Only New York, I think. Really, Kansas City doesn't compare to New York or Los Angeles or anything like that. So, those AFL teams were translated into the NFL, and it still worked. And there was the rivalry with the Steelers was one brutal but exciting rivalry. The guys that were on that team were characters. One guy told me a story. He was a Jets fan. When I was watching a game where it was the L.A. Raiders, and I was saying, God, we wouldn't have tolerated the quarterbacks they got in L.A. In Oakland, because they had Jay Schrader. Sorry, I was going to say Ricky Schroeder again, and Mark Wilson. It's like we got spoiled. We had the Snake, we had Plunkett, we had Darryl LaMonica, but So anyway, the story goes like this: because all the New York bars closed at 4 a.m. Stabler goes in there. They're going to play the Jets, and all the guys in the bar by Stabler round after round after round after round. He staggers out at 4 a.m. The guy's dad calls his buddies up and says, "Put the farm on the Jets." Stabler is not going to be able to do anything. And Stabler throws for over 400 yards, and the Jets are blown out, and about $20,000 worth of New York money is lost.
Was that a regular season game?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I wish I remember what year he said it was, but that's kind of what the Oakland Raiders were. Hard-living guys who managed to get the job done every week. And you had a lot of characters. Certainly Madden was a character. You had an announcer, Bill King, who was a character. And the city loved the team. They sold out. When they moved to L.A. the first time, they had sold out for 12 straight seasons. As Pete Rozelle pointed out, you don't move a team that sells out for 12 straight years. The city that made the money for you is right there. They should not have moved. And although I will say this, the mayor of Oakland at the time was very arrogant about his situation when there was a threat of an antitrust suit. And Rozelle did kind of encourage him, "Don't worry, our rules are ironclad. They can't win." And unfortunately, that happened. And it's happened a second time. And Mark Davis is a complete traitor. He grew up with those Raiders. He was a kid. He was in his teens or early 20s when those teams were playing. For him to leave Oakland is, I consider, absolute treason.
One of my favorite people in the NFL is John Madden. I love the video. I think it was after they won the 76 Super Bowl in January of 77. He wrote a few books, and I think in one of the books he said that they dropped the players had him on their shoulders, but he was such a big guy. I think he said they dropped him after that because he was such a big load. But John Madden, and he was an announcer for a long time, and just a funny guy, good guy, and boy, John. And I thought, this guy, I just love. Would you like to talk about John Madden?
Yeah, obviously entertaining, sort of a larger than life personality, and you can think of. And you can also say this about John Madden, and you can say this about the Oakland Raiders, not any other form of Raiders. He was on the sideline for a lot of controversial plays. He was there for the Ghost of the Post. He was there for the Holy Roller. He was there for the Immaculate Reception, of course, and the Sea of Hands. It's sort of like all sorts of like weird things. Well, I won't call them weird things, but spectacularly strange things happen. You got a guy like him describing it. It was kind of larger than life, much like the man himself. Just a big presence, and fun to listen to. Really was a great time, great, and he let them do whatever they want. And he's told stories like, I guess when Ted the Mad Stork Hendricks dropped some change in the toilet, he ended up crumpling up a $50 bill, throwing it in the toilet, and then fishing it in there, and then getting all the change out. And they said, "What, Ted? What'd you do that for? You think I'm going to put my hands in a toilet for only change?"
Okay. Now, going back to baseball, the San Francisco Giants won the World Series in 2010, 2012, and 2014. I think that's a good example of when a team finally breaks through. Of course, you do have these one-year wonders, but it seems like they got the confidence of, we did it once, we can do it again. And here, do you want to talk about those three teams, three World Series titles in 5 years?
Certainly, and then pitching had everything to do with it. You had Lincecum in his prime. You had Matt Cain was good. His problem was during the regular season he didn't get a lot of run support. I'm trying to think of Madison Bumgarner, of course. Really, really good pitcher for all three of those series. In fact, he was a rookie in the 2010 year. So, the pitching staff really was what carried them, and certainly a little bit of luck here and there. But they knew it. They made the right moves too in mid-season and getting certain players that were kind of inspirational. Hunter Pence being one. That's the main one I can come up with. And the one flawed thing with those teams was after one World Series was won, one player had one great year, they'd sign him to a big contract, and then he bombed. And they would go, Aubrey Huff was one, Marco Scutaro. The ones that are still there, by the way, but Brandon Belt, Crawford, and you have Posey are all having decent years right now. So those really were the catalysts for the last two, because only Posey and Bumgarner Posey is the only one who's a position player. All those other three pitchers were on all of those teams. And,
now you guys really talk about breaking through. You had the golden, and here I'm in Cleveland. You guys beat us 3 out of 4 finals, and we played. Yeah, everyone. I guess people got sick of Cleveland because what's this guy? They said, why they didn't want these national sports guys on ESPN didn't like coming to Cleveland for the NBA finals. But anyway, who's this? You guys won the NBA finals in 2015, 17, and 18. Do you want to talk about those 3 championship teams?
Yeah, it goes straight to Curry and Thompson and Green on the defensive end. You had great scoring, and getting Durant just made it like, wow, okay. You just expected it with Durant, and I do believe that they should have won. There was a little controversy in their loss to Cleveland. I'm sorry to throw that in there.
Okay.
You had Draymond getting tossed out of that, and then Bogut got injured and could not play the 7th game. And Bogut was a mean presence. I mean, that was the catalyst for me. And in fact, I actually gambled on the Warriors at the beginning of the season in 2015 because they'd played the Clippers the year before and they were hanging in there. But Bogut had got a punctured lung from a broken rib thing getting in there, and he couldn't play the final game. And then when he came back the next year, it's like if he stays healthy, this team has defense and it has the ability to score, barring injury, that they should be able to win, and they did. And then they went 73-9, and then of course lost to you guys when Draymond got suspended and Bogut got injured for the 7th game. And then you had Durant come in for the last 2. And I mean, signing Durant, I mean, it was like, well, this is going to be easy. It's going to be a walkover. Nobody could stand up to that amount of scoring. You know, arguably he's the best player in the world. He's long, he can defend, and he can shoot. But Steph was the catalyst. He was the last draft pick, I believe, under Don Nelson before the team got sold. So yeah, it didn't get sold. Excuse me. I'm got to get my years straight here, but nevertheless, that was the last draft pick that Don Nelson was involved with. Had Curry.
Now, since we're a history show, the Warriors, they'd had that lone championship in 1975, and I was just looking at the roster of teams, and 2 guys Rick Barry was the big star. Butch Beard played for Cleveland, and
yes.
I'm sure you enjoyed that team because I want to talk about the 1975 NBA Finals champions, Golden State Warriors.
That was, of course, that one was out of the blue as well. Except that everybody that knew that Barry was a star, but he was so temperamental. I mean, he got on a lot of people's nerves. In fact, to be honest, the team that followed the next year that actually had a better regular season record, and I think that they should have repeated. But they lost to the Suns, and I still remember Derek Dickey missing the free throw that would have iced the game, and Keith Erickson being brought out of mothballs to tie it by the Suns, and then they lost, of course, the final game. But I was that team, the 75 team was pretty good, and was sad. The only thing that was sad about it was they traded longtime center Nate Thurman for Clifford Ray from the Bulls, and then that's the year that they won. So Thurman never got a ring, and he was a great center. But the next year they drafted Gus Williams, number 1, so they had that 1-2 punch at point guard with him and Phil Smith. That was a better team than the one that won the world championship. But of course they upset the Bullets, which is like that was not supposed to happen. Let alone sweep them. My God.
Now, switching back to baseball, the 70s, which is like the era that's precious or important to me, and I'm just thinking some guys on the Giants. Chris Spire, Bobby Bonds, I thought was the coolest player in the world because he could hit home runs and steal bases, and we had him in Cleveland for a year. So I was like, oh my gosh, we got and then that interesting trade with the Yankees, Bobby Mercer for Bobby Bonds, and then of course you mentioned Willie Mccovey, Willie Mays. Probably one of the most. Another guy, home runs, and a guy who can play center, who hits all these home runs, and who can steal, and an exciting player, Willie Mays. And then as a younger player, he just had so much enthusiasm. And so do you want to talk some more about the 70s, early 70s San Francisco Giants?
We were sort of getting in there. Well, when you mentioned Bonds, Bobby, that is, you had once Mays was traded to the Mets, and at that time, believe it or not, that was not a bad trade. He was like 42 years old. It's like they had Gary Maddox coming up. He was a rangy center fielder. You had Matthews. You had a Matthews, Maddox, Bonds outfield, which was very talented and young. But again, they had issues with Candlestick Park. And there was like a gradual sort of sell-off, or not a sell-off really, but they went to other cities. Bonds got traded, like you said, for Mercer, and it was kind of one of those things where I would say that Bobby Bonds was a little bit better than Mercer. Mercer certainly was not a bad player, but it was like somebody wanted out, and that's what happened. I think that's what happened with a lot of the players for the Giants in the 70s. They'd bring up somebody good. Because the 73 team did have Matthews, Maddox, and Bonds. They were contenders. They didn't win. You had other players in the 70s who wanted out and eventually got out, and Jack Clark being the most vocal of those. And they won the division in 71, losing to the Pirates, and then they contended in 73 and 78, but they never did anything else. And I just remember it was like Candlestick. I was loyal to Candlestick because I'm a fan, and I always say to people, if you were over 35 and you didn't intend to came at Candlestick, you're not a real Giants fan. You had to have one day of the cold, and then they put the AstroTurf in there. It was actually unpleasant.
There's a great quote: 2/3 of the earth is covered by water. The other 1/3 is covered by Gary Maddox.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, he was rangy. He got to things. He was a great ball player. And
I remember the thing about Candlestick is guys getting blown off the mound and called for a balk.
Stu Miller, the All-Star game. Yeah,
incredible.
Yeah, it got windy. I mean, you don't see it now, but it was like that. There was hot dog wrappers blowing all over the field at that park. It's like there was if you didn't put the food in the garbage can, it was going to end up in the field.
Our guest has been Bruce Kessinger, who's a San Francisco Bay Area sports enthusiast. Do you have any? The time has flown by. Do you have any final words for our audience, Bruce?
I am honored to be on the show, and I thank you people for listening, and I hope to get a second chance at it at some point. If you guys will have me, and it doesn't even have to be about the Giants. It can be about anything, because I'm a sports fan, and I enjoy talking about it and following it.
Well, we'll get you back on. It's been wonderful having you on. Anytime I can find a guy to talk about 70s sports, and the Oakland Raiders and the stuff we've talked about in the Giants in the 70s is really a lot of fun.
Indeed.
I wish you well with your up and coming career with this wonderful Mark Mancini Sports podcast network.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, very good. Mr. Bruce Kessinger, San Francisco Bay Area sports fan. Next week looks like we have Pete Carlotto, who's written a book on the NBA from 1975 to 1989. Dear listener, may the road rise to meet you. May the wind be at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face and rains fall soft upon your fields. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of his hand. Good night, everybody. Thanks again, Mr. Bruce Kessinger.
You're welcome.
Very good.